Now's our time for announcements. I actually have one more that was not in our slides on behalf of worship committee. So I am letting us know that Westwood is attending our national service on February the 6th, and it's a sharing our faith service. And we this year are actually applying for a serving our faith grant. So worship would like to just throw out that it's extra important for us this year to donate into the Sharing Our Faith special collection this year. So just so that we're aware, February 6th, we are only doing Sharing Our Faith. There is not a Westwood service that Sunday. And that is my announcement on behalf of Westwood. And now we will sing along to Steve for our opening hymn, Come, Come, Whoever You Are.
Come, come, whoever you are, wonder, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come. Come, whoever you are, wonder, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come. Come, whoever you are, wonder, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come, whoever you are, wonder, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again,
Welcome to this morning, this day, and this opportunity to be together in community. My name is Ilara Stefaniuk-Gaudet. My pronouns are they and them, and I am your service leader this morning. At the beginning of a Westwood service, whether in person or online, we pause to affirm that the land where we gather has borne witness to thousands of years of Indigenous history, culture, and spirituality, and continues to do so. People have gathered, worshipped, told stories, engaged in politics and trade, loved, lived, and died in Amiskwaciy-Waskahigan, the Cree name for Edmonton, meaning Beaver Hills House, for some 12,000 years or more. This is Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place and home to diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others. As a white settler, I personally continue to be called along a path of reconciliation and decolonization. What this looks like changes daily, and the calling pulls my spirit and helps me guide my decisions. From whose traditional territory are you joining us from today? Please let us know in the chat. Good morning, merry meet, and welcome to Westwood. This month, we're featuring our fourth Unitarian Universalist principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. As a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we come together each week to learn more about what it means to be human. We're not here because we've figured out life's questions or because we think we've got it right. We come here to learn more about being in relationship together. how to listen, how to forgive, how to be vulnerable, and how to create trust and compassion in one another. Thank you for showing up from wherever you are this morning. You are welcome here. This morning, I am your tech extraordinaire and service leader. I'm excited to extend a warm welcome to our speaker, Liz James. We're in for some fabulous storytelling. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our musicians, Steve Bell and Rebecca Patterson, for sharing their wonderful musical talents, as well as Bill Lee for his work in the upkeep of our YouTube page and fabulous video editing work. I am grateful for each and every one of you in this room. All of you are precious to our community, and it is what it is because of your presence. Thank you all for being here this morning. As I light our chalice this morning, I invite you to light your own candle at home. The chalice is a sacred symbol to us. If you don't have a chalice or a candle, you can make one with your hands like this. It's our secret worship committee sign language. So if you don't have a candle, you can just do that to light our candle today. Our chalice lighting words this morning is a piece by Tanya Marquez called Our Lives Intersect and Intertwine. It is a wonder and a mystery that our paths have crossed, that in the immensity of time, in the vastness of space, we coincide here. I am in awe at the ways in which our lives intersect and intertwine, at the beauty we create when we gather. May our coming together make us more compassionate, more just, more caring, and more loving. May our hearts and minds be open to this offering. I am so glad you are here. Let us worship. Let us marvel at the miracle of being here right now and the mystery that has brought us together. We light our chalice in the spirit of the beauty we create when we gather together. And now I am going to welcome Liz for a story for all ages this morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Ilara. This is a story about saying something when things aren't right. Now, I don't know about your family, but my family is often involved in that kind of thing. Some of you might have experienced going with a parent to a march or holding signs or been part of writing a letter or sending an email. And I'm sure that all of you have had the experience of seeing something that wasn't quite right and saying something about it. I want to tell you the true story of two kids who did just that. I don't know their real official names, but their nicknames that everyone called them were Bukuru and Toyi. They were 7 and 9 years old, and they lived in a very poor country in Africa called Burundi. They lived in a small hut of a few rooms with a grass roof in land that was always warm and always green the whole year round. And they mostly spent their days running around outside, playing and taking care of their family's herd of cows. And one morning, a little over 6 years ago, they were in the field in the middle of the day taking care of the cows, and they saw a group of men arrive in cars. And those men had guns, and they also had a man with them that looked like maybe he wasn't choosing to be there. And those men ushered the other man quickly into this hut, and they closed the door behind him. And that man was indeed their prisoner. In fact, he was a Unitarian minister by the name of Reverend Fulgence Ntatijimana. We will call him Fulgence. Fulgence was the minister of the Unitarian Church nearby. And the Unitarian Church had been doing exactly what so many Unitarian churches in North America do. They had seen things going on in their country, and they were saying something. And they were going to demonstrations, just like congregations here do. Now, in Burundi, the government responds to demonstrations sometimes in quite a bullying way. People were getting seriously hurt for disagreeing with their government. So the Unitarian Church there did something really brave. They bought some cell phones and some vests that said Human Rights Observer, and they began recording what was happening. Bullies don't love it when you observe and record and report what they are doing, so this didn't go great for the church. Now, these kids, they didn't know any of that stuff. of course, but they did know something wasn't right. So at lunchtime, they went to the local police station and they explained what they had seen. And you can imagine at 7 and 9 years old how nervous they felt walking into a police station completely by themselves. But they did it. And the police were really nice and they said they'd go and they'd check out what was happening. So the boys went back to the field with their cows. But at the end of the day, before going home, they checked back at the hut to see what had happened. And the police had not kept their word. They hadn't checked on anything. So the boys screwed up their courage and they returned to the police station again. And they said something again. And this time they were able to convince some policemen to come right away. The police arrived just as the men were taking Fulgence outside after telling him that they were going to take him outside and kill him. And the police stopped this from happening. They took everybody to the station. Things eventually got sorted out. Fulgence tells me that he believes that if it weren't for those boys saying something twice, he probably would have died. So the story has a happy ending, sort of. Like a lot of stories, it whines a little bit. It wasn't a happy ending for Fulgence right away. Soon after that day, he was unjustly arrested and he was sent to prison. And again, people helped him. We wrote letters and we made phone calls. Some of you helped with that. And people of all ages, including kids, wrote letters to Fulgence's government to say that what was happening wasn't okay. And Fulgence knew about this. He was allowed visitors sometimes, and the visitors brought him a copy of the petition that people were signing to save him. And he looked at the thousands of the names and he thought, who are these people? Why are they working to save me? He didn't recognize most of the names. But at night, when he sat alone in the dark, he would think about how his values were their values, and we stand up for those values together, and we care for each other. And the symbol of the care that he pictured himself, that he kept in his mind, picturing to keep himself hopeful, that symbol was the flaming chalice. And every night he would imagine it floating in the dark, in the long hours of darkness before he fell asleep. After 9 days, the petition and the letters worked, sort of. Fulgence was released, but someone kind of told him on the side that they're coming for you again in the next morning. So a friend drove him straight to the border. He didn't pack a toothbrush. He didn't say goodbye to his mom or his dad. And he made it across the border and eventually to Canada as a refugee. And now he works as a minister in Canada and runs a charity called Flaming Chalice International, which helps the people in the places he comes from. And so that same chalice that meant we weren't going to forget him years ago, now means that he won't forget other people that he left behind. And now it's Fulgence who is able to see injustice and do something to fix it, with the support of Unitarians from all over the world. So when you see a flaming chalice, think of the ways that we're connected, how we care for each other. Think of all the people who are helped by, for example, that organization today, because of Bukuru and Toyu, who saved Fulgence's life, who saw something they knew wasn't right, and who spoke up, and who kept speaking up until it worked. Back to you, Ilara.
Thank you, Liz. The lighting of candles of concern and celebration is a cherished tradition in many Unitarian Universalist congregations. It allows us to understand each other's worlds a little better, enabling us to share our joys of our lives and offer comfort to those with concerns. Our time of sharing helps us deepen in community. Now, as Steve plays for us, I invite you to enter your candles into the chat. I light one final virtual candle for all of the unspoken joys and concerns that we carry in our hearts. Now, if you'll join me for our affirmation. May the light of these candles inspire us to use our power, to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to serve the spirit of truth in loving affection and trusting hope. Westwood is a self-sufficient community sustained and maintained by its membership. There are many ways to donate to Westwood, including by volunteering time, sharing your talents, or donating financially. E-transfers can be made to info@westwoodunitarian.ca. Thank you for your generosity and continued support. Now let's sing along with Rebecca for our offertory hymn.
From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. From together I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
It is now my great privilege to reintroduce Liz James. Liz hails from Saskatoon, where she runs the UU humor organization Mirth and Dignity. She's also on the board of Flaming Chalice International, which she mentioned in her story, but is going to tell us more about now. Welcome, Liz. Take it away.
Thanks, Ilara. I'm going to start with a story from my friend Salash. When my friend Salash was joining our congregation in Saskatoon 10 years ago, I was one of the committee members who was charged with orienting him to the congregation. Salash grew up in Masai Mara, a tribe in Kenya, and he grew up exactly as many generations of the Maasai did before him, which meant no English, no reading and writing of any kind, no electricity, unlimited exercise, time with friends, fresh air, unlimited sunshine, always warm weather. In early adulthood, he fell in love with a Canadian who was visiting, and they had a family. And that's how he ended up to be in a church in the snowy depths of Canada, where he and I became friends. So I remember at this newcomer dinner, when he was joining our church, showing him that flow chart of how the church works. Everybody has one. And so there's all the different committees, and they're reporting to the board. The Committee on Ministry is kind of a different thing. And there's the congregational meeting is in there, which has its own authority. So I'm showing him this chart and I'm walking him through because I feel it's very important that he understand our governance. And he looks at it for a long time and he listens, and then he goes, no. And I said, no, really, this is how we make our decisions. And he said, no, it's not. Usually the mothers make the decisions while you are watching the children and talking. I have seen you do it. And I said, I know, but afterwards we vote. There's this. He looked at it for a little bit longer, and then he said slowly, this looks like a lot of work. And I explained that it is, but it's important that we do this so that we can have community. You don't have to have this for community, he said. How you have community is you bring people together, and then that's a community. Many people make a community without he struggled for the word committees. It was like he was trying to explain that 2 + 2 = 4, because that's what 4 is. It doesn't need a committee to be 4. It's just 4. There's no process. When we first arrived in Kenya 4 years ago for a visit, the first thing Celeste did was drive us to the plaque in the center of the village and haul us out of the Jeep to stand beside it. This plaque marked the death of a white tourist a few years ago, and we read it. It was in English. It told the story of the man waking in the early hours of the morning and heading out for a walk and being mauled by a wild elephant. The plaque, it's important it was in English, clearly it was intended for white people to read. As I read it, it was about dangers of African elephants. Celeste saw the cause of death a little differently. He explained it thusly. This man had a Maasai guard, like you have a Maasai guard. This man did not listen to his Maasai guard. He went for a short walk by himself and was killed instantly. When Muzungu people do not listen to their Maasai guard, they die right away. Muzungu is the word that they use for white people, which really came in handy for me because they don't really have a word for sorry. But every time I couldn't see something like a nest of birds 3 feet away from my face that my guide was pointing to, I would just point to my eyes and I'd be like, Muzungu. And they would go, huh? And every time I did something stupid, I'd use that word and they'd all shrug like, yep, what are you going to do? She's not in her own culture. Being Muzungu meant that you had to be under constant supervision in case you decided to like pet a snake or cuddle with a lion cub or something. Muzungu could not be left unattended, except in their tent with a guide standing outside while they were sleeping. But the guide still stood outside just to make sure they didn't do something crazy like wake up early and go for a walk by themselves. I often wondered about this Maasai guard who followed me everywhere, carrying his spear that to my eyes was pretty much just a pointy stick. And his job was to protect me from lions with this pointy stick. And he was paid reasonably well for it. At least he was paid reasonably well for a no lion day. I couldn't shake the feeling that if a lion did approach, his wages would no longer be sufficient for this task and he would tender his resignation. And I asked Salesh about this. How do we know he's not going to run away? I said. Salesh looked at me like I had a cabbage for a head. You are under his protection, he answered. Yeah, but he doesn't know or care about me, so why would he? He's Maasai, Salesh answered. You're under his protection. There was a pause, and then Salesh repeated, he's Maasai, as though this ought to settle the discussion. So that night, my sleep was interrupted by what I can only describe as a terrifying kerfuffle of noises. I was nestled in that tent that I had mentioned earlier. It is a very nice tent, nicest tent I have ever been in, had a flush toilet kind of tent. It was, though, still made of canvas, like thicker canvas than in Canada, but not lion thick level canvas, not even scissors thick level canvas. And so I would always try to tell myself that if I was in the tent, the lions couldn't see me, and that lions relied on sight, of course, exclusively to track their prey. But this all required a lot of mental discipline to keep believing that, especially in this moment when it sounded like maybe the lions were like quite close. And it wasn't just the lions that had arrived either. There was some other kind of creature out there, some new African creature that I had never heard before, making this terrified, mysterious kind of bleating, moaning sound. And there were the sounds of men, several men yelling at each other in the local language. And I lay perfectly still with the dark inside the canvas so absolute that I couldn't even tell if my eyes were open or closed. And the darkness and the fear felt like a damp washcloth covering my face. And I lay there perfectly still and swallowed my terror. And in the morning, I learned the terrifying, mysterious new animal was, in fact, a cow. And I said, cows in Canada don't make that noise. And Celeste said, that's because there are no lions attacking them, which made sense. Cows make a different noise when lions attack them. The cow had wandered away from the herd in a nearby village, and a team of Maasai men had tracked it. And they found it eventually, but they had found it at the same time as the lion found it right near our tent. And the noises that I'd heard was them stepping between the cow and the lion and shooing it away with the weapons, which I cannot emphasize enough, were machetes in one hand and in the other hand, a pointy stick used without the benefit of sight because it was pitch black. But the lions ran away because lions are afraid of Maasai men. So it eventually retreated. Celeste says that's usually how it goes. Lions are afraid of the Maasai and will kill a Maasai warrior very rarely. He then added, but Muzungus kill them on sight. We'll kill a Muzungu on sight. But I wasn't listening because I was hung up on this word rarely that he had used. As in not never. Not never kill a Maasai? Not often, Celeste said again, which is just another word for rarely. I couldn't imagine risking my life like that, I said. They're Maasai, Celeste answered, like it was a complete sentence like before. Then he said, a Maasai can't give up on a cow. And suddenly it all slid into place. It wasn't just about the one cow. Suddenly, my Muzungu eyes could see the big picture. It's been explained to me that the Maasai have survived for centuries through their reputation for bravery and self-sufficiency and honor. And they have a reputation for never giving up. And the fact that everybody knows that is their greatest asset. The lions do not tangle with the Maasai. The neighboring Kikuyu tribe does not tangle with the Maasai. Even the Muzungus often would not tangle with the Maasai, and Muzungus tangled with everybody. They tried, the Muzungus, but when they did, the Maasai would strike back hard and then they would retreat into the jungle with their herds of cows. They never changed their life, their way of life, and they're known all over Africa because they successfully resisted colonialism. In modern times, the Muzungus aren't adversaries exactly. It's more complicated. They're a threat still, but they're also tourists who bring lots of money that they exchange for a chance to look at wild animals in safety. And so the Maasai reputation is still a powerful communal asset. The reason my guard would protect me at all costs was because if one Maasai let one tourist die, everyone's reputation would suffer. The entire region's economy would be put into jeopardy. Everyone's livelihood and independence was at stake. He'll protect me, I said, because I'm like a cow to him? Celeste nodded. A Maasai can't give up his cow because a Maasai can't give up his independence, his reputation. His Maasai identity is how so many generations of his people have survived. My Muzungu eyes, they were improving. I felt a cold knot in my stomach because I wasn't there as a tourist on safari, not primarily. I wasn't there to look at wild animals. I was here working on behalf of a project. The Altumo Well project began with my home community raising money in partnership with our Unitarian congregation for a well in Celeste's village. And over time, that well had grown into a garden and a community center, and there was this budding relationship between the two communities. And I was here as a part of that relationship to talk to the Maasai about some challenges coming to their way of life. So in recent years, the Kenyan government had divided the land and deeded it to the individual Maasai. So now tribes couldn't move to chase the rainy season, and this was taking a toll on their livestock, half of whom had died in the last year. Also, the Maasai population itself was growing, and the finite land couldn't sustain a growing population, especially not on a livestock-based diet. And so there were the challenges of global warming, and add that all together, and it was clear that the outside world was finally reaching the Maasai, and that they did need help in adapting to it. Now, this explanation had sounded really simple back in Saskatoon. As the saying goes, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And I was here to tell the Maasai they needed new skills and guide them in their development and transformation. But when the task was in front of me, it was totally different. Because I was just one more white person arriving to tell the Maasai how they needed to give up their cows and embrace the future. I was one more colonizer telling them that this time it was different, just like every colonizer had told them before me. And I was going to say this like I was some kind of expert, shadowed by this Maasai guard who had to follow me around to keep me from trying to pose for Instagram with a venomous snake on my head or whatever dumb idiot thing I might do. Teach them to fish? What kind of arrogance was that? As we rode to the well on the day of the big meeting, I felt this feeling of unease in my stomach. And I found myself listening back to the advice of my friend Fulgence, hoping to find something to hold on to. Fulgence reminded me so much of my friend Celeste, which is a little strange because they are from polar opposite backgrounds. Fulgence went to boarding school, he had a degree, lived in the city, worked for not-for-profits in addition to running the church on the side. He grew up at the center of colonialism in Africa, and Celeste grew up in one of the last pockets of successful resistance to it. But even though they were very different, the three of us had had a meeting before my trip. And Fulgence brought all of this experience in not-for-profits and community development, working with groups all across Eastern Africa. Celeste brought the in-depth knowledge of the Maasai and the region that we were working with, and I know a lot about committee structures, and I'm very good with Robert's rules. There are not a lot of statements that you can make about Africa that are true of the whole continent, but not a fan of Robert's rules might easily be one. So mostly I listened, and the meeting that unfolded was nothing like what I was used to. Fulgence asked question after question, detailed things about everything about like how the Maasai chose which hut was built and the ratio of goats to cows, who was related to who. He was frequently expressed admiration for the Maasai, whose spirit is admired all over Africa. He mostly just listened, though. And at the end, when we asked him for advice, Fulgence said, the Maasai have always solved their own problems. The most important thing is for the Maasai to continue to believe that they can solve their own problems. The most important thing is to listen and help as you are asked to help, and in only the ways that you are asked to help. I thought about this during the Jeep ride. Nobody had asked for my help yet. I thought about it as the women filed in for the meeting, as I cooed at the babies and sipped at the tea and offered granola bars from my bag. I observed every woman arriving and putting 10 shillings in the coffer. It was 20 if you were late. I think that's great, and we should adopt that here. I asked questions through my translator. I learned that the husbands take the money if a woman tries to save up. So they have a club where every woman puts a tiny amount in, and then they can buy one big thing, like a goat for one woman or school fees, and they can spend it quick before there can be interference. And they each take turns being the recipient according to the need and the situation, and the group decides that. It was easy to do, as Fulgence had said, and express admiration for the ingenuity and the perseverance of these women. It was amazing. It was hard, though, to bring the conversation around to giving up their cows, especially because even with my Muzungu eyes, I could not escape the clear fact that I was not the person to teach these women to fish. Eventually, an older woman took a breath to speak, and everyone got quiet so you could tell it was a plan that she was speaking for the group. The cows, she said to me, are not working. There are too many people, there's not enough land or water, the herds are dying. Half our herd died last year, she told me. It's not going to work for very much longer to live this way. They knew. Of course they knew. They were living in the middle of it. How could they not know? We try to sell things at the market, the woman explained, but we have to borrow what we sell, and that's a very expensive way to run a store. We know how to make beaded jewelry for tourists, but borrowing the money for beads is also expensive. We know how to make honey, and we have resorts willing to buy from us, but it costs money to make it sanitary. There's a certification for tourists, and there's the issue of packaging. So we need you to talk to the white mothers and ask them to help us. Of course they had a plan. These women already know how to fish. They just didn't have the fishing rods. The amount for each project the women were planning was in the hundreds of dollars. I wrote down their stories, took their pictures, ran the simplest and easiest crowdfunding campaign of my entire life. Westerners were moved by the story. Money poured in. We took the money and used it to fund the projects as a microloan, but with a catch. When the loan got paid back, it didn't get paid back to us. It got paid back to the community, and then the council would decide who would borrow the money next and what it would be spent on. And in this way, it could transform a whole village by transferring the decision-making power about how donor money was spent to the local level. In this way, they didn't give up their cows, like their literal cows, sure, yes, but the things that the cows represented, like the autonomy and the ownership, they kept those things. There are two reasons I'm telling you this story. One is to tell you about Flaming Chalice International and its work, because I think that they're one of the most exciting stories in Unitarianism today. I think of this way of building relationships and then staying out of the way, and it's one of the most effective models of aid I've ever seen. Well, it's the most effective model of aid I've ever seen by a wide margin. And I will put the website into the chat, and it's on the last screen if you want to learn more about Fulgence's work. But there's another reason that I'm telling you about this, which is because of the whole, how do we dismantle white privilege and systems of privilege conversation, particularly on a global scale, which often focuses on how white people can be better at wielding their power, how to be woke, how to know the right thing to say, and so on and so forth. And this is a good conversation to have in many ways. It's also a conversation that demands impossible things. When I was heading over to Africa to do the right thing and teach them to fish, I was demanding an impossible thing of myself. I was trying to act with a wisdom I had been taught I had, but I did not in fact have. And giving up on that felt great. It was not humbling to realize what I didn't know. It wasn't painful to be less important to the solution. It felt instead like fixing a really broken thing. It felt honest, and it felt like fighting back too, because the real solution in the long term isn't for me to do a perfect job of managing my inflated share of the resources. I wasn't bad at advocating for other people who are in worse positions because I suck. I was bad at it because advocating for other people is really hard to do. It's much better if the system shifts so that people have the power they need to advocate for themselves. And the real solution lies in wisely transferring resources until the power eventually becomes more equal. But the decision of what constitutes a wise transfer of resources feels overwhelming and impossible. And it felt that way to me because it was for me. You can't tell who's going to be effective in a whole other culture on the other side of the world. It takes local people to do that. And it takes relationship and a lot of getting out of the way. And sitting on the board of Flaming Chalice International, I've seen that organization accomplish so much because the rest of the board is from Africa. And they're able to figure out which local leaders and which plans are the right ones to put trust in. And then they fund those ideas and then they get out of the way. Our tradition prizes collective decision-making and democracy, but I think it's really important to realize the limitations of that model. There is so much potential good in giving up decision-making and power within organizations and knowing what expertise you don't have. Not everyone needs to vote on the shingles for the roof. In entrusting each person with their piece and focusing on your own piece, things get easier. Working with Fulgence, I became very quickly convinced that the governance model he was using was the one I wanted for my own organization, Mirth and Dignity. And I leaned really heavily on his expertise when we set things up. And that organization runs in a way that's pretty foreign to me, actually, but I cannot deny that it is very effective. There are way shorter task lists, way simpler processes, way less burnout. And we talk all the time in like church geek circles about the future and how are we going to run communities on less money and when it's viral communication, and we sit around wondering how we're going to do all of that. And somehow we always ignore the whole time that the Unitarians in Africa are already succeeding very well at all of those tasks. And we can ask them and they'll tell us. And not all of their solutions work here, but some of them do. So it's true what I said in the children's story, that the Flaming Chalice is about not forgetting each other, and it's about helping each other, and it goes both ways. But it's not exactly about taking turns. It's been my experience that the helping does go both ways, and that the African Unitarians have things I need too. But it's also very hard to separate helper from helped in every given moment. When I try to map that out in my brain, the chart in my mind begins to resemble that one I showed Selash so long ago that he frowned at before telling me that that is not how it works. So the chalice doesn't mean taking turns helping to me anymore. It's become something simpler. It's not about who helps who. It's not an agreement. It's just an honoring of the law of the world, one of the laws of the world. It's the honoring of a truth, which is that our power, at its core, comes from the ways that we are connected to one another. And Laura will introduce our closing song.
Thanks again, Liz. That was amazing. All the stories. Our closing hymn this morning is When Your Heart is in a Holy Place.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell the story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place.
Our chalice extinguishing this morning are the words of Manish K. Mishra Marzetti. The universe sings no less because time and space wear us thin. The music calls us to recognize our limitations, to recognize that the song is best sung with others. Thanks for coming. Flaming Chalice's website, which I highly recommend going to check out, is here on our closing slide. So I'm going to leave this slide up for a few minutes for folks who want to write it down. And next Sunday, we will be joined by Trudy Grainauer for a service on Zen Buddhism. So you won't want to miss it.